in Gettysburg. It could always be worse. Figure we'll just chat outside for a little bit about the Eisenhowers in the home. We'll take your tickets at the door, and then everybody can begin that self-guided tour. The reason that we want to take advantage of this beautiful gathering space is when the Eisenhowers were building their dream home, they were not really planning on tour groups of 40. So once we head inside, you'll all be free to explore at your own pace. Some of the hallways, particularly upstairs, are a bit narrow, so we're not going to go guided the whole way through, but we will chat for just a little bit about the Eisenhowers in Gettysburg. After all, that is one of our most commonly asked questions. What are the Eisenhowers doing in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania? I mean, Dwight Eisenhower was born in Texas, he grew up in Kansas, his wife was born in Iowa and grew up in Colorado, and we're pretty far from all four of those places. And when they bought this property in 1950, they were really planning on retiring here. And Gettysburg really isn't known for its warm sandy beaches or mild winters, so why here? Why this place? And luckily for us, for the sake of a good story, the Eisenhowers' lifetime of service and their connection to Gettysburg run hand in hand. The first time Dwight Eisenhower ever visited Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, he was a pretty ordinary guy. It was the spring of 1915. He was a young West Point cadet about to graduate. And he and his classmates came here to tour the battlefield, to walk in the footsteps of people who made history in Gettysburg. Up until this point in his life, as someone who was always fascinated by American history, Dwight Eisenhower had read about Gettysburg, but it existed solely in the pages of history books. He really wasn't of the means to travel halfway across the country just to see some Civil War battlefield, but his West Point class comes here on a staff ride to study the landscape, the decision points that made history in the summer of 1863. And it's a very impactful visit on a young Eisenhower. The second time that he comes to Gettysburg, it's a whole new world, although it's only been 3 years. The second time he arrives, he's not as enthusiastic about his visit. The year is 1918. What's going on in the world in 1918? The First World War, right, or the Great War. The war to end all wars, this massive global conflict that we found ourselves swept up in. And Dwight Eisenhower is pretty frustrated because unlike many of his classmates who are receiving orders to head over and experience combat on these battlefields in Europe, Dwight Eisenhower receives orders that send him to the battlefields of Gettysburg. I know, it's confusing, right? What in the world would he be doing here? In 1918, the battlefield as we know it, as Eisenhower knew it the first time around, looked completely different. Transformed by the United States Army, a temporary tank training camp known as Camp Colt was established on the battlefields of Gettysburg. Over 10,000 men were under the command of Eisenhower here to learn the art of tank warfare. So despite his initial frustrations at not really getting the placement that he'd envisioned for himself, it became a very important place for him as he develops into one of the brightest young military minds that, spoiler alert, this world will have ever seen. Here in Gettysburg, he begins laying the foundation for who he is as a leader. An honest, empathetic leader who's quite innovative, a creative problem solver, and through his decisions here at Camp Colt really starts to make a name for himself. So very early on in his career, Gettysburg becomes a special place. He is also living in downtown Gettysburg with his young wife, Mamie. They've only been married a few years. They're living in town, raising a toddler together. So they're a young family navigating the world in the midst of this world war. And they're also creating a very personal connection to the community of Gettysburg. In fact, Gettysburg becomes just one of the places that they call home over those next several decades of their lifetime together. Mamie Eisenhower estimates that by the time they return for a third time to buy this farm, they have moved about 37 times as a couple. And we're talking everywhere from Paris to Panama, the Philippines, Washington State, Washington, D.C., and back again. So by 1950, 5 years after the end of the Second World War, Eisenhower, who has become a household name internationally, is considering a change of pace. He wants to become part of a community. He wants to own a home of his own and finally establish roots somewhere. And he and Mamie, looking up and down the East Coast, find this rundown dairy farm for sale in Gettysburg, a place that they'd lived once before, a place that they'd created a connection with, a place, excuse me, that is centrally located. Gettysburg always has been easy to get to and easy to get from. Kind of why the Battle of Gettysburg takes place in the summer of 1863. We're not far from our nation's capital. We're not far from New York City or Baltimore or Philadelphia. Gettysburg is a pretty nice place to be. He also wants to leave a piece of land better than he found it, right? We talked a little bit about that before the program officially began, but he was really interested in land stewardship. This farm was on the market for 2 years before the Eisenhowers purchased it, so he sees this as a new challenge into retirement to transform this landscape. It really checks all the boxes for the Eisenhowers. They purchased the farm in 1950, but those retirement plans get put on hold pretty quickly, right? Dwight Eisenhower does not retire in 1950. Otherwise, we probably might not be here. Shortly after they close on the property, he gets a call from President Harry Truman, who is going to ask him to head over to Paris, France, and serve as the first commander of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, newly formed at this point in our story. And Eisenhower just became a first-time homeowner of a fixer-upper at the age of 60. What do you think he's going to do? Accept the command, of course. He wouldn't be Dwight Eisenhower if he'd said no. Yes, sir, Mr. President, heads over to France, takes command of NATO, helps them navigate some of their earliest months of existence, and then he and Mamie set their sights on a new endeavor, that of the presidency. And in a landslide victory in the fall of 1952, Dwight Eisenhower is elected our 34th president. And that kicks off not one, but 2 terms of the Eisenhowers in Washington. And it's really during those presidential years that this farm starts to take shape and in turn serve a couple that spent the entirety of their lifetime in service to others. First and foremost, this becomes a place of rest and recovery. Dwight Eisenhower, someone who experiences several massive heart attacks in his lifetime. Prime Minister of India, Prime Minister Nehru, was an overnight guest here. And perhaps most notably, the Premier of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, who came here to the Eisenhower farm during his tour of the United States in the fall of 1959. So this home served as a place where Eisenhower could show a more vulnerable, personal side of who he was, not as a leader, but as an ordinary American. A man who enjoyed farming, who enjoyed painting, who loved to spend time with his wife, with his family, who was a grandfather. All of those other sides of who this couple was really play out here, and only here on the Gettysburg farm. So as you go through the house today, home that they built to us. I think it's a nice full circle moment, right? We talked about the first time Eisenhower ever came to Gettysburg in 1950 was to walk in the footsteps of history makers, to learn from the place, something that you just can't quite get from the pages of a book. Now here.
So now we're taking a walk inside to Albert Howard. So.
Come here.
Right?
It's your flash off. Yeah, it's off.
Welcome in, folks. Left, the Eisenhower living room, room number 1 in your booklet. Once again, feel free to loop back through this space as many times as you'd like. It feels a little crowded right now. Once again, they weren't really planning on us wonderful tour groups coming through the house when they built this home, but please take your time. Once you head upstairs, as much time in here as you'd like. Welcome in, everyone. Welcome, welcome. we talked outside, so we won't chat in the living room. It's a really tight space for 40 folks. Yeah. Happy to answer any questions if you have them. White House staff. Yes. And that includes our wallpaper here in the entryway. Some made from baby Eisenhower. We do use the handrail as we it's cool. You can have the handrail off to your right, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Yes, we do seasonally. Our curator will do it once a quarter.
This is the
We do
kitchen.
decorate the home for Christmas because the Eisenhowers were big fans of the holidays. So we put out the Christmas china. We put out some of their.
This was the mother-in-law's room.
This is mother-in-law's room. President mother-in-law's room. This is the sitting room for the president. This room belongs to the general. General's room.
Eisenhower painted that portrait.
This is president's main bedroom. This is the maid's room. Maid for the president's room. This is a guest room. Final guest room. These are 8 boxes. Room. These are real, the things the president used. The Loris's room. Stuff that he used. There's the bedroom, there's the telephone, there's the screen, and there's a bathroom over there. Yep. These things are 1998 past Centage Street. This is the kitchen. Stuff that they used, and this is the kitchen for the president. They normally cook for the president and stuff. This is the kitchen. This is the den. Look at the bookshelf. This is the den for the president. This is the office for the president. See the telephone. You can see Abraham Lincoln picture.